Hi, I'm Dr. Ashley Smith, and I'm a clinical psychologist who specializes in anxiety and obsessive compulsive spectrum disorders. And I am here with my three of my favorite colleagues who also share that same expertise, Drs. Heather Smith and Amy Jacobsen and Lindsey Murray. And together we have a combined 40 plus years of experience. Can you guys believe that? More than 40 years among us treating anxiety and related disorders. And we know that in the midst of the coronavirus, in this global pandemic, there is a lot of anxiety and fear out there. So we are coming together tonight to share some helpful tips for dealing with anxiety and uncertainty during these times. So ladies, I'm gonna throw out a general question, and that is, what are the biggest concerns that you've been hearing lately and the biggest pieces of advice that come to mind right off the bat?
Well, I think one of the big issues is just really not knowing. And there's just quite a bit of uncertainty in, how far the recommendations might go as far as, quarantine, or if businesses and restaurants are going to be closed, or if your daycare is going to be closed, or your office is going to be closed. So I think part of what we're all sort of learning to do with this is sort of tolerate that uncertainty and not get so caught up in, all of those what ifs, and trying to kind of take things day by day and recommendation by recommendation. So I think that's something that I've spoken with a lot of people about, is we just don't know what the next week or two or month are going to look like.
Yes, I would agree. The uncertainty piece is huge, and there is so much uncertainty. Like Lindsey was saying, there's an uncertainty about this condition and how it's going to impact our nation and continue to impact the world. And then there are the day-to-day uncertainties. Are kids going to go back to school after spring break? How are we going to manage businesses in our day-to-day lives? Will there be toilet paper when we go to the grocery store? There are so many, details that go with the uncertainties with this situation. Another question I've been getting a lot is, how much should I be watching the news and reading about this? Because if we spend all day watching the news and going onto social media and getting bombarded with this information, our anxiety will continue to skyrocket, and the fear and the uncertainty will just continue to grow. And so it's finding that really important and helpful balance between getting educated, getting the knowledge and the recommendations that we need, while also continuing to live our lives to the best of our abilities and continuing to connect with people in the ways that we can.
I think you're touching on something that's really important, both of you, and let's come back to the uncertainty piece, but going down this media diet is how I'm thinking of it, because there are a few things, even if we take anxiety out of the picture, just the way our minds work, is that there's the illusion of truth. So the more often we hear something, the more credibility we give it, period. So if you're constantly on social media or checking the news in other ways, even if you're not really being careful about listening to credible sources, that information is soaking in and it's going to be treated as fact, even when it's not. And the other piece is, the more we're hearing about something, so the saliency of it, the more readily we can call it to mind, the bigger the deal it seems. So if you're constantly on social media, constantly online, constantly on the news, it's going to, I think, amplify the panic, period. So I've been encouraging people to be really mindful. I do that anyways, but especially these days, to be really mindful about how often they're checking social media and news, and to limit it both time-wise and to the sources if you can.
Which really takes effort and planning, and actually saying, okay, I'm going to not have this channel on. I think even on just kind of primetime TV, there's a ticker at the bottom giving updates. So looking at all of the options that we have to sort of take a little bit of a social media break or diet, or even news media break, and saying, okay, I'm going to watch this station instead, or I'm actually going to turn the TV off right now because this isn't good for me to be constantly seeing and hearing about it, when often there aren't great updates. It's just kind of constant conversation.
Mm-hmm. And if we circle back to that uncertainty piece, Lindsey, that you brought up, what are your tips for people with anxiety disorders and OCD in dealing with this uncertainty? Right, that's the hallmark of these disorders anyway. So what advice do you have? And how about for people who are maybe not as used to working on tolerating uncertainty, all of a sudden find themselves having to navigate this? What thoughts
Well,
do you guys have?
It's been really interesting for me and some of the people I'm working with who are actually, in some ways doing a lot better than their friends and family members who don't have quite as much practice really building their tolerance for uncertainty. So I have some people who are working on contamination concerns just as part of their OCD treatment, and are actually able to kind of turn off that part of their OCD that says do more, because they've had practice with that and are finding themselves better able to make decisions in those moments, which I think is kind of great. Like, yay, putting that treatment really into action each day. But I think part of that comes down to just being able to follow some of those recommendations without doing more. And that's where OCD gets caught up, right? Is, okay, this is what they've said to do, but that doesn't feel like enough because of my OCD, so I have to do a lot more. So kind of bringing it back to those normative guidelines, which right now are very different than what we would have recommended even a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this is such an important time to continue to practice accepting uncertainty. And one of the things that we often say to our patients, especially those taking on their OCD, is that they actually do have the ability to handle uncertainty greater than their anxiety wants them to believe. And that we deal with uncertainty in so many ways each and every day. Getting into a car, leaving our house. We're constantly surrounded by uncertainties, and yet we don't even think twice about those, or at least most of those. Many days we have the capacity. It's about being able to strengthen that tolerance and to be mindful of that during this time of intense uncertainty for everybody.
It makes me think of a framework I often use when it comes to seeking certainty, and whether that is through cleaning and decontamination steps to make sure that health is protected. I'm also hearing a lot of concerns on the financial side as people are seeing stock markets tank and 401ks go down, or not being able to go to work, or childcare. So there's these financial implications too. And people want to seek certainty. We want that sense of control. And so I often will tell people, all right, but these are the questions that you have to ask. Is this knowable? Period. Right now, we don't know where this goes. So is it knowable by me right now? And if it is, great, take the steps you can to get that information. But if it's not knowable, or it's not knowable by me, or it's not knowable by me right now, then our goal is to stop checking, stop seeking that certainty, and more sit with it, or find other things to put our time and energy into today.
And finding the right boundaries, finding where you're going to draw that line. And so you're saying, I'm going to go this far. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow the recommendations that have been given to us. And that's where I stop. That's where I place the boundary, so that you can live with the uncertainty beyond that.
Right. What do you guys think as far as some handy tools for sitting with that uncertainty or dealing with the stress? And whether it's, worries about what's going to happen health-wise or healthcare system-wise or financial-wise, but even just the day-to-day stress of routines being disrupted, right? All of our routines are disruptive as events are canceled and schools and work have shifted to remote options. What tips do you guys have for dealing with that stress and maintaining some sense of normalcy?
I think it's really important to put some structure around your day anyway. And also, something I've even found helpful is kind of focusing on the positives of this, right? I have more time with my kids. It's a bit slower pace. There's an opportunity for me to, do something for others by social distancing, even if I'm not, worried about myself getting sick. But we've been trying in our house to, really add that structure and make sure we're doing that self-care. So we're still getting exercise time, we're still getting learning time, creative time, things like that, and really adding that. And then the other thing that, I've been recommending is, social distancing is not social isolation. So, encouraging people like get creative and, have board game nights via, Skype with family, and, play words with friends, call people that you normally, maybe don't have time to talk to. and really making sure that you're still reaching out to people and still getting that support and still doing, you know, those important self-care things, even if, you know, everything else seems, you know, very different and wonky compared to your normal schedule. To try and give some sort of structure to the day, I think is really helpful.
I think that's important, Heather, and making sure it's sort of the, I mean, we would call it behavioral activation, right? Those activities that we need to be healthy, happy, functioning humans and to protect us against depression. And that those are things that are enjoyable, things that are productive, things that are social, and things that are active. So I think it's especially important to make sure that we're doing all of those now too.
Yeah.
And then building our ability to be present in those moments as well. So being able to really engage and focus on the activity that you're participating in versus, okay, I'm sitting here playing this game, or I'm on Words with Friends, but I'm also really worried about things and I'm still engaging in those thoughts. So kind of using those 5 senses skills and noticing and really being involved in those activities. And I kind of describe this with my patients as like, pretend you're the narrator of your life. And in this moment, what am I doing right now? Okay, right now I'm sitting at the table and I'm eating dinner, and here's my fork going into my plate, and here's the bite of food, and this is what this tastes like, and really getting your brain more focused and engaged on those activities, because it can be really hard to just to turn those thoughts off even when you're involved in an activity. So we almost have to kind of force that change of channel, right? My brain really wants to be on the Corona channel right now, but right now I need to be involved in this activity with my family. So I should be on the dinner time channel right now. So how can I really work to refocus my attention so that I can get as much enjoyment from that activity as possible, versus kind of being 1 foot in, 1 foot out with that worry.
I think it's a great point that this is a wonderful opportunity for us to really build and use our mindfulness skills. So Lindsey, you're talking about what I call sports commentator or just the facts. You're calling narrate your life. Mm-hmm. Heather and Amy, what are some of your favorite mindfulness strategies?
I love the channel idea. I use that a lot with my patients as well, like Lindsey was sharing about the Corona channel versus the present moment channel, really being able to shift and use that remote control to help our minds be more centered and more focused. Sometimes one of my other favorite analogies or metaphors that's used is the idea of an unwanted visitor joining a party, you know, and so it's kind of, you know, coronavirus is an uninvited party guest right now. And so we're trying to just have fun. It's, you know, supposed to be spring break, but we have to accept that this is a part of our life right now. And so instead of shutting down the party, it's being able to learn how to continue forward while this guest is still here.
Mm-hmm.
I like really too thinking about, you know, with the mindfulness and in changing the channel, I like to think about trains leaving a station, right? And there's the coronavirus train that we have all hopped on of late and let ourselves go down that rabbit hole of what ifs. And, you know, we've all done it enough by now that we know where it goes. We know the mood it puts us in, you know, and like really right now, is that where I want to go? Or could I get on a different train, right? Which is the family time train, or, you know, things like building a new hobby train, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how can I actively recognize that I have a choice about which train that I get on and where I go today in this moment? And that doesn't mean that, you know, it's easy or that the conductor isn't waving us aboard, you know, but it's just that practice of shifting and getting off the Corona train and getting on another one that takes us to a more helpful, healthy place, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I find using actions or physical activities can help change that channel, switch trains, get present. So I often will have people use their non-dominant hand to do things. Like one of my favorite mindfulness exercises is brush your teeth with the wrong hand. So for me, that would be left-handed, because it's going to force you to focus, right? Or do activities at half speed. Like if you're washing the dishes, that's a wonderful time for our minds to go to those scary places. But if you slow down on purpose, it reins your attention back into the here and now. So I think sometimes that can be a helpful way to practice mindfulness too.
That's a great point. I know for my family, we were supposed to travel for spring break and had to cancel our plans like so many people. And so over Saturday, this recent Saturday, we just sat down as a family and just started to map out the entire week. So, okay, we've got all of these days that are going to be totally free and available to us. How do we want to use this time? So knowing, what we were going to think of and plan for and get excited about each day, combined with the present moment awareness activities, just has really helped us be able to have a good path forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also for people who do struggle with anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder, this is going to be, it's really hard to change the channel and turn off our worry about this. But, one strategy that I like to use with my patients is worry time. So in that schedule, you might build in like, okay, here's my time to check the news. So at 3:00, I know I'm going to, at that time, check. So then the rest of the day, when we're supposed to be more engaged with our family, we can kind of be like, okay, all right, I know I'm going to get to look at 3:00. So right now it's easier for me not to go there because I know I've got a time later to kind of place that focus.
Yeah. And I think, Lindsey, a lot of people have this kind of underlying belief that worrying is problem solving. And if I'm not worrying about it, I'm not doing anything. And so I think even putting some more structure around that worry time and, doing a little bit of like, okay, what are your top 3 what ifs, right? What if my childcare is canceled next week? And then, okay, what can you do to prevent that from happening, if anything? And what could you do to repair that, And once you've like outlined a few things that you can actually do, then that worry is put to bed, right? So we're not just spinning in that worry time, but we're actually adding some structure around it and focusing on what is in our control, what is helpful, what we can do now. I think is really important too. And I love the idea of coupling that with the one time a day that you go to the news too. I think that's great. And don't do it before bed.
Yes.
I love your point, Heather, about the difference between like productive worries and excessive worries, or problem solving versus ruminating. Yes. And I love my filter questions. So I also teach people I work with one-on-one to ask, is this an actual problem as opposed to a hypothetical or an imagined or a worried? Is it an actual problem for today? So that's trying to rein in that like point A to point Z. Are we at A to B? So it's an actual problem for today that I can control. And if it is, great, problem solve, come up with your action steps. And if not, it's time for mindfulness. It's time for exposures, or it's time for valued actions. Basically all of those things that we're talking about of get into the present moment and do things that matter.
Yeah, I like that a lot too, Ashley, and something that I use in my own life and also talk with people about too is, there are these things that we might have to think about in the future, right? There are things that, today is this day, but in 3 days, I might have to think about that problem. So I like to think about, okay, well, you know what? Today, Lindsey gets a break from that. Future Lindsey, Thursday, Lindsey can solve that problem, but, today, Lindsey gets a break from that. And so kind of being able to acknowledge like, hi, yeah, that might be a problem I need to think about, but that's not something I can solve today. So let's assign that to my future self. And even have a certain day where we decide that, okay, now's the time to think about that, but I can't be productive or problem solve or figure anything out today because I don't have maybe the resources, the information. I don't have a way to plan for something that's so unknown.
Mm-hmm. And all I can think as you're saying that is, yeah, when we're doing that, when we're spending that time planning, when it's not an actual problem that we need to solve or can solve today, that is seeking certainty, right? Trying to control things that we can't. And that will end up feeding anxiety and perpetuating it. Are there, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, one thing I was going to say, another thing that I think is helpful for those people that really do struggle with anxiety, and there is so much kind of contradictory information out there, and toilet paper isn't necessarily, needed for our survival, but everyone else is buying it. Should I be buying it? And so I think it's really important for people that have anxiety and have that tendency to overdo, to talk to your therapist if you're in treatment, or find a trusted other that you feel like is really level-headed, and kind of ask them like, what are you doing? Are you do you have 6 cans of peanut butter, or are you just making sure you have 1, you know? And I think that's a nice way to kind of check that excessiveness when you see on the news and around your community that a lot of people are going to extremes.
Yeah,
And
right.
this is, you know, not a time to panic.
Right. I saw Dr. Karen Cassidy, who's a well-known anxiety and OCD specialist in our country, wrote something yesterday, and it was guidelines for people with OCD to maintain their progress during this time. But what really stood out was she said it's really important to remember this as a time of inconvenience, not a crisis. That we're taking these social distancing measures as a precaution, but it doesn't mean crisis. It doesn't mean panic. And I thought that was a helpful way to reframe it and to right size the worry. So we don't want it too big. We don't want it too small. We want to right size the worry.
Yeah.
That's
So
extremely
any final words that you guys or topics that you want to hit today for dealing with anxiety and stress at this point in time?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, you know, it's about being calm in the face of stress. Being panicked in the midst of it isn't going to be helpful to you or to your family or to anyone else around you. So being able to do what you can to gain that calm, level-headed ground. Amy, I'm sorry, I think I interrupted you a bit.
Oh, no, I think that's wonderful. I would agree with that completely. And one aspect I was going to just add is that we know that it's very helpful to look at things outside of ourselves. That really makes a difference in our outlook and in our lives in terms of stress and anxiety management, and that maybe there's still an opportunity within this situation to find the greater good, to look for, you know, that greater good that we can do for our families and for others, our loved ones, even our community. There are going to be complications, of course, because of the social distancing, but perhaps we can still find a way to help other people, to be available, to be supportive through phone calls, through even taking, you know, food and leaving it at the doorstep for an elderly neighbor who doesn't feel comfortable leaving their home. You know, are there ways we can reach out and be a part of supporting others, not just focusing on our own needs and fears?
I love that, acts of kindness as a coping skill, which is phenomenal. So.
Yeah, and focusing on gratitude, you know, that's something I've been doing too. I'm happy that I'm here with my kids. I'm happy to have a slower pace for a while, and happy that, you know, I have food in the fridge and I'm not an at-risk population. And, you know, I think times like these, it's sometimes brings to light what is most important to us. So really identifying what are my values and how can I use this time engaging in valued living and being grateful for the things that are going well in my life.
I love that too, Heather. And I really like using gratitude almost in opposition to worry. Find something in this moment, no matter how bad or hard or scary the moment is, there's gotta be something that we can be grateful for. And if you can tap into that gratitude, that's a really nice way to counter anxiety and rumination. So thank you, ladies, for joining me. I think we covered a lot of really helpful tips, from maintaining structure and activities, focusing on what matters, kindness and gratitude, worry time versus productive problem solving, and limiting media and checking. So tons and tons of great stuff. Catch us we're going to do part 2, which is advice specific to parents to help kids during this time. Thanks for joining us.